Hello again. Welcome to my second video in my weekly WoW recap series. There's a lot to talk about this week, unsurprisingly, so I'm just gonna jump right into it. As with last week, I'll be dividing the video into three portions. The tech talk portion, where I talk about the Mythic plus techs I've discovered over the weeks. The WoW news portion, where I talk about the news regarding WoW, as well as hotfixes or patches. And lastly, the portion about myself. To start the week's tech talk, we go into Ruby life pools. There are quite a few routes in this dungeon where you skip the first Juggernaut. But if you don't have a rogue or a way to go invisible yourself, you'll have to use an Invis pot to get through. There is a sneaky trick you can do here. If you use an Invis pot right before the keystone is put in, you will have 6 seconds after the gate opens to run past the Juggernaut. I will warn you the distance is quite far, and you very likely won't make it all the way unless you have a Druid's Roar. Just in case you have a Druid in your party and you want to use a DPS pot for the next pull, this is a useful trick to know. The second tech isn't very new, and it has been implemented in MDI recently. I'd still like to discuss it anyway though. You might have seen a Wowhead post about it a few months ago. The 4 Kings strat in Halls of Valor. The idea here is to pick up 3 beers from the feast hall earlier, and throw it at 3 different kings. You would then drag the king you activated over the 3 kings you threw the beers at. Then when the kings would make their way back to their default position, you would talk to them, pulling them into combat. This allows you to pull all 3 kings at the same time, significantly reducing the time it takes to kill the kings. Speaking to the kings may be tricky without an add-on to automatically scroll through the dialogue, so I do recommend installing one. In this clip, I use Little Wigs. If pulling all 4 is slightly too daunting for you, you may opt to use 1 beer alone instead. Using 1 beer simplifies the process, and will also result in a faster kill on the kings, just not as much as the 4 kings pull. Just be careful when you're bringing up the beer from the hall below, as entering combat will dispel the beer off any carriers. In a similar vein to the 4 Kings strat, the third and last tech I'd like to share is regarding the last 2 mobs before you fight Balakar Khan in Nokhud Offensive. This one also isn't very new, and I'm sure if you've been paying attention, you might have seen a streamer do it here or there. The last 2 mobs before Balakar Khan are mini-bosses, and they have a lot of health. In an ideal world, you would want to skip them, especially in fortified weeks. However, if you don't kill the mini-bosses and you pull the boss Balakar Khan, if the 2 mini-bosses are not in combat, they'll automatically be aggroed and be pulled with the boss. This is pretty bad, and if you pull this and are not prepared for it, it's a good chance you'll just wipe from all the mechanics happening at the same time. But there is a way to skip them and avoid this. If you get a hunter or a rogue to attack the 2 mini-bosses first, and then you pull the boss, the 2 mini-bosses will technically be in combat. As a result, they will only be aggro to the hunter or the rogue and not to the whole party. Then, after the rest of the party engages Balakar Khan, the hunter or rogue can feign death or vanish. Doing so will reset the 2 mini-bosses, and you can fight Balakar Khan without either of those pesky mini-bosses bothering you. Just be careful not to point the boss's charge into the mini-bosses, as this may cause you to pull the mini-bosses accidentally. That's it for the tech and dungeon trivia this week. Let's talk about developments in WoW. There's a lot to talk about after the several announcements made about patch 10.1. But before talking about all the proposed changes in 10.1, we'll briefly talk about the hotfixes that have come over the past week. The first of which is an update to Jasharyu, the 3rd mini-boss before you fight the 2nd boss in Court of Stars. They've updated the graphic. That's nifty, especially since people have been complaining about it for a little bit now. They've also nerfed the inferno damage of the Blazebound Firestorm spawned by Kokia Bloodhoof by 35%. The 35% is a little bit suspicious. It seems to line up quite well with the 35% nerf to the Blazebound in the trash a few weeks ago. Maybe they forgot to nerf the boss's infernos last time. Interestingly enough, they've also nerfed the Nokhud Offensive's 2nd boss. The Raging Tempest, yet again, has received a 20% damage nerf to Electrical Storm. And Surge of Power, the buff you get from picking up orbs, has been increased by an additional 2 seconds. They also patched the weird sanguine bug with the third boss we saw last week in the MDI. So at least if you want to, you can pull trash onto that boss during sanguine weeks now. With that out of the way, let's talk about the exciting new things announced for Season 2. The patch name has been revealed, Embers of Neltharion. It seems the patch will delve deep into Deathwing and his legacy, particularly with the Black Dragonflight, with its leaders vying for power at the moment. The raid has also been revealed, Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible. Deathwing's laboratory, they seek to infiltrate it to steal the lab's power source. How cool is that? Among other things, they also released a cinematic that explains some lore about the 3 remaining primal incarnates. The cinematic also revealed the snazzy incarnate's visage form. And I'm pretty sure it's not just me, but they seem to have some resemblance with the faction leaders in the Shadowlands. Maybe I'm reaching, but the Ice Lady looks a lot like the Winter Queen, that one's obvious. The Earth guy has horns that are kinda shaped like Denathrius' horns, and the Fire guy has horns that resemble the Primus' horns. But I don't really have any more similarities beyond those, really. We got a nice peek at the tier set appearances, and they do look really cool. I, like many others, are absolutely fawning over the Priest's tier set. I mean, just look at those wings! The other sets look nice. Thematically, they work very well, but some definitely win more than others. I mean, the Demon Hunter one looks absolutely atrocious, and the Monk one is kinda boring, you know. We're also getting cross-faction guilds, which is really cool. It's not something I've largely been paying attention to. I don't really have any friends on the Horde side, though I'm sure there is a reasonably large community that's looking forward to this. Blizzard looks to be set in removing the barriers between the Horde and Alliance. It looks really nice. And more pertinent to my channel's goals, we have a lot of news about the second season of Dragonflight Mythic Plus. The first of which is that we know what the 8 dungeons are going to be. Freehold, Underrot, Neltharion's Lair, Vortex Pinnacle, and the remaining 4 Dragonflight dungeons. I'm a Shadowlands baby, I've never played any of these dungeons. But I have heard that Freehold is a community favorite, people love it, mostly because it's short. And you can rest easy knowing that I am already working hard on the script of all 8 dungeons. I am expecting quite a few changes to these dungeons, as the developers have said as much. So I won't be releasing videos far before the 10.1 release date, as chances are they'll be outdated after a little bit. In other big news for Mythic Plus, we won't be receiving a Seasonal Affix next season. The developers cited that the increasing complexity due to the rotating dungeon pool has minimized the need for a Seasonal Affix, whose purpose was to change your routing between seasons. A task that would be more applicable if we had the same dungeons in rotation for 4 seasons long. Lots of news, really exciting stuff. I've linked all the relevant articles in the description if you wish to read the Wowhead articles yourself. And finally, for the section about me. How has the week fared for me? Well, I've played mostly on my Discipline Priest and Vengeance Demon Hunter this week, bricking several 20 keys. This week is surprisingly difficult. I know I said last week I figured that Fort Sanguine would be easy, but man, with all the mobs that just kinda stand still and cast in place, Sanguine results in a lot of lost DPS. Surprisingly, I find myself having more difficulties in Fort weeks than I do on Tyrannical weeks. Potentially because bosses have mechanics that are fairly predictable and easy to play around. But when it comes to trash, you don't really think so much. They live for far longer, they hit far harder than you normally expect. For example, the elementals in the first part of Algathar Academy are killer on Fort weeks. They only cast 2 abilities, Surge and Mana Void, each doing an insane amount of damage. If you're unlucky and you don't kick anything, you might just get targeted by 2 Surges and die. Perhaps it's slightly more difficult for me, because my group usually runs with multiple range DPSs, sometimes even up to 3. This really restricts our access to interrupts with short cooldowns, so we just have less interrupts all around. Dragonflight in particular is very harsh with their interrupts. If you let casts go off in Dragonflight, the group ends up taking a significant amount of damage. In contrast with Shadowlands dungeons, interrupting casts used to be mostly to move mobs. Sometimes there are some priority mobs you need to kick, sure. But in Dragonflight, it's meant to stop an absurd amount of group-wide damage. Another example that comes to mind is Ruby Life Pools. The Cinder Weavers cast Cinderbolt at a random player, or Storm Speakers in Nokhud Offensive that spam cast Stormbolt, or whatever it's called. Missing these kicks feels far more punishing this expansion compared to the last. And I can't say if it's entirely fun. I think Blizzard's move to increase players' max health was really clever, and I hope we see more of it to reduce the general burstiness of mobs in general. Maybe it's a hot take, or maybe not, but I think Mythic Plus in general would benefit immensely from having mob health scale faster than it scales damage. Several classes already fall into the fault that mobs die before their cooldowns are over. By having health scale faster, more players would be able to flex their DPS muscles. Of course, the concern would then be, this would just make dungeons sluggish and slow, things die, take forever, But I find the current climate of mobs in our dungeons to be a bit too bursty. And when you go into higher keys, the mob's damage outpaces your ability to survive them. Oftentimes to the point where you just get one-shot by basically anything. I think there's a balance to be had here, and I think we're far too much towards the bursty end. Getting one-shot isn't fun. But then again, is missing a timer because enemies have too much health a good feeling? I can't speak to everyone on this matter, but I think finally being able to cast Pyroblast on my Fire Mage would be a great benefit. And that's all I have to share this week. I do appreciate it if you stayed all the way till the end. I hope you have success in your keys in the following week. Tyrannical Raging Storming is seemingly an easy week in the Mythic Plus lineup, though I did say that about Fortified Sanguine, so really take my observations with a grain of salt. Leave a like or subscribe if you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next weekly WoW recap.